Well, welcome. I'm Russ Whitehurst. I'm director of the Brown Center here at the Brookings Institution, Brown Center on Education Policy. And I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Matt Chingos and Beth Akers. I think you can figure out which is which. And we're going to talk to you about student loans and higher education. Thanks for joining us. So you two, Beth and Matt, have been making a lot of news, demonstrating, at least to my satisfaction, that student loans aren't the crisis that people have thought that they might be, because when calculated in the right way, students have about the same level of debt they've had for a very long time. But there's a sense out there, and I share it, that there's something amiss with higher education, and maybe how it's financed has something to do with it. I mean, we certainly have problems with access. Students don't go to college as much as we'd like for them to. They certainly don't finish in nearly the high proportions that we see in many countries with which we compete. And our system's not productive. We spend a lot per degree, more than any other country in the developed world. Every time I looked, and there's a lot of angst in the general population, so you can't go to a party or a gathering or a Thanksgiving feast with family members who have kids who are going to be college age without people worrying about how they're going to pay for it all. We're pretty good at identifying some issues, but what should we do to address it? What policies should the federal government adopt that would do something to make the system more productive, that would make it easier for families to feel like they can afford college, that would promote completion and all the other goods that we can agree are worth aspiring to? So, Beth, if there was one thing you would do if you were president or Speaker of the House or somebody with some real power rather than just a person at Brookings, what would you do?
Well, I'm glad you posed the question that way, because I was actually going to skirt the question, which is what a politician might actually do. But the point is, I think you identified that there are a lot of complaints, right? Things that people think are wrong with the system. And therefore you want to know what the solution is. I think we actually want the intermediate step, which was understanding what is really the problem with the system. So let me chime in there, and maybe Matt can build off of this. My feeling is that the problem is that we have something that looks sort of like a market, but it doesn't really work like a market because we don't have savvy consumers. And so there are a whole host of reasons why people aren't shopping for higher education like they shop for milk in the grocery store. But a lot of the problems that we're seeing in the symptoms that you identified and things that you hear in social settings are coming from the fact that this is a market that doesn't work well as a market.
So, but what does that mean? What does that mean if I'm going to send an 18-year-old to college and have to pay for it? What are you saying to me in terms of markets not working?
So it means a few things, right? So we believe that markets are really good at getting prices to come in line with the value of the product, whatever it is. In this case, it's the higher education. But there's a whole host of assumptions that need to be in place in order for those market mechanisms to actually work so that prices really do reflect value. So one of the things that's most important in the case of higher education is that in order for this to function well and the price mechanism to work, people need to know the value of what they're buying, and they need to be sensitive to the price. So they need to look at this service that they're about to consume and decide, is this worth the price tag that I'm going to pay for it? And so there are a lot of reasons it's difficult to do that. One is it's impossible or nearly impossible for an 18-year-old or their family working together to look at a degree and to figure out what its value is without the right data. So that's something the government can do. And then, second, it's difficult to understand what prices are because of the price structure, because of the net price versus sticker price issue. Just generally, it's a difficult calculation, and it's one that we don't have a culture of talking about in the way that people should probably be thinking about it, which is this is a long-term investment that pays off over the course of your lifetime. When you want to know if something's worth it, you need to look far into the future. And that's just not the way that people think about this. And so it's not hard to see why we don't have a successful marketplace.
So, as a parent, back when I was at the stage when I was, sending my sons off to college, I think I was maybe not a lot different from other parents in similar circumstances. I was hoping they could get in the best college, at a very good college, and they would go and finish. And I wanted to pay as much as I could pay to assure that they got the best education that they could get. What was wrong with my working assumptions? I think what you're saying is I wasn't the kind of consumer you wanted me
Maybe you were, and maybe the outcome that you got to was the right outcome. But your strategy was essentially, I look for the place that has the highest price tag, and it's probably going to provide the highest value. In this case, the value is the financial return of the degree. So is that necessarily true? Probably not. And maybe it's true at certain segments of the market, as sort of more elite places. But the real concern is that these other places that are on the lower end of the cost spectrum, how do people know where there's value and where there's not? And so it's a successful strategy for some people to make choices that way. It's not a good way for the market to function well.
I think Beth's right that the lack of information is a big reason that the market for higher education is so dysfunctional. I think another reason it's dysfunctional is because of the way in which the government is involved. Now, the government's involved with all sorts of good intentions around providing access to higher education, and they do accomplish that to some degree. But it comes at the cost of every institution being eligible for financial aid, or almost every institution. So there's no differentiation in quality across institutions. So you get the same kinds of government support regardless of where you go. And that has some upsides, which is that folks can go where they want. The government's not telling them where to go, but has the downside of they can take their dollars and go to places that maybe aren't so great. And those places can raise their prices because the government is guaranteeing support of those students. I think nowhere is that more apparent than is the case for graduate education, where students can borrow up to the cost of attendance as defined by the college. The college says, here's what it costs. The government will give you loans for up to that amount, which can lead to further rising prices. So I think one thing policymakers ought to seriously think about is having a more market-oriented approach to higher education, or rather to graduate education. Get the federal government out of graduate education. See if we have a better private market for student loans developed there, where people are only going to get degrees that pay off. And then see how well that works and whether there are some lessons that can be learned for undergraduate education. I don't think you'd want to take exactly that approach there, because there are more instances, I think, where folks feel that kids have a right to some education beyond high school. We want to provide that to everyone. But at some point, you have to draw the line, and it seems after a bachelor's degree is maybe where we ought to be drawing that line.
So what you're saying is that, if I were going for a graduate degree in physiotherapy, I expect to earn a living off of that rather than getting a government loan, you would expect me to go to a private lender who'd be willing to lend to me to do that if the lender thought that there was a good prospect that I could repay the loan. Is that what you have in mind?
That's exactly right. And if you were going into a program that wouldn't pay off, you wouldn't be able to get the loan, or you wouldn't be able to get it on terms that you thought made sense.
Yeah. And so what would the advantage to the taxpayer be of this? Any? I mean, are we losing or gaining money as taxpayers, as a nation, on these loans we're making for graduate study?
Well, that depends on who you ask, and I'm not sure folks want to get into the weeds on how you account for student loan programs. The government certainly takes on some risk by making these loans, but they have the unintended consequence of potentially driving up prices. So if you get the government out, that may put less upward pressure on prices. So there may be benefits beyond just preventing people from making bad decisions, taking on loans that they eventually have a hard time paying back.
Well, I'm going to answer my own question. The one thing I would do is get the government out of tax expenditures for college tuition. So there are maybe 10 or 11 federal programs where if I'm going to college myself or sending a child to college, I can get a tax credit on my return for the expenditures I've made. I did a little back of the envelope before we came in today, and there's roughly $30 billion a year that we as taxpayers are spending in order to support these refunds, really, to people who are spending money on higher education. And the expenditure is upside down in that it's more affluent parents, more advantaged families that substantially benefit from these tax expenditures. Low-income families basically, can't wait till they file the return and get a tax refund several months later to afford higher education. And it turns out we're spending almost the same amount, $30 billion a year, on Pell Grants, which are grants to the neediest families to attend college. And those grants of about $5,000 a year fall far short of what the cost of attendance would be, even at inexpensive state colleges in most cases. So I'd get the government out of that business and shift at least some of those funds to support the neediest students so that they can be active consumers can have resources to spend on their own choices, where they currently don't have that money, and many don't attend college or drop out because they don't have the money or they're afraid of taking on the loan or their bad risk. What do you think about that?
I think you're sort of highlighting this point that I was going to raise actually after Matt spoke about making sure that the government involvement in higher education finance is about creating the right incentives, or creating incentives for the behavior that the society would like to see. And so tax credits supporting people who have paid a high price tag for higher education is not money that's affecting behavior in the same way that Pell Grants can potentially change behavior on the margins of getting more lower income students into achieving or enrolling in college degrees and hopefully achieving them.
I'm not sure that we've answered my question to even my satisfaction, but there certainly are things that I think the government can do, and the taxpayer ought to insist that the government do, to make this system, which is crazy in some respects, more rational, again, focused on achieving the particular ends I think there's a general consensus we ought to be achieving, and that's getting as many people who are able and prepared to go to college to get there and finish a degree as possible, and to do that in ways that are more efficient with our resources than we currently do it. Right, Matt?
I think we've hit on two pretty concrete steps. Get rid of the tax credits, which have really blown up in the last couple of years. There were a couple, the Lifetime Learning Credit and the Hope Credit from the Clinton administration in the 90s, and then we saw the Obama administration propose the American Opportunity Tax Credit, which is just hugely more expensive. So plowing that money back into Pell could do a lot more for low-income families, for lower middle-income families. And going back to my proposal to get the government out of the funding of graduate education, let that there's a lot of private benefits to that. There's also some societal benefits, but there's no real evidence that there's a market failure there. That could probably work pretty well on its own, and I think the rest of the higher education finance system could learn a lot from that experience.
I'm sure this conversation will continue privately and with onlookers at a future point. So thanks for sitting down and sharing your thoughts with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.